Welcome back to the Vinyl FAQ series, and today's question is 33 and a third RPM versus 45 RPM. What's the difference? So this is another great question that's actually a little bit more tricky to get to the bottom of than you might originally think. So let's dive right in. So the short answer and the biggest difference is that these are just two different speeds of record. So RPM stands for revolution per minute, and one revolution is just one complete spin of the record. So at 33 and a third RPM, you get 33 and a third turns of the record per minute, and at 45 RPM, you get 45 turns of the record per minute. So 33 is slower and 45 is quicker. So that's it. That's the simple answer. 33 RPM is slower, 45 is faster, but there's more to it than that. So if you stick around, we're going to look at what the different speeds are used for, what's the difference in quality between the two different speeds, and why did they add the third to 33 and a third RPM. So first of all, what the different speeds are used for. 33 RPM, because it's slower, is mainly used for cutting 12-inch albums, and that's because we want to fit more songs or more information per side of a record. So if the record's been cut a bit slower, it means we can fit more on. So 33 RPM generally, nearly all of the time, is used for cutting 12-inch albums. Now 45 RPM is nearly always used for cutting 7-inch singles, and this is because we're only trying to fit one song on a 7-inch, so we're not as concerned with the amount of time. And the quicker speed actually means you get a slightly better quality, which leads us on to our next point. But before we move on to that, just a quick note to say that you can get 12 inches at 45 RPM, and very occasionally you can get 7 inches cut at 33 RPM. Now these are not the norm. 12-inch albums cut at 45 RPM are for the hi-fi sort of enthusiast market, and not many artists release those because it means you have to split an album over several discs rather than fitting it onto one. And likewise with 7 inches being cut at 33 RPM, it's not recommended because the sound quality gets a bit lower. But then some artists want to try and squeeze two short songs onto a 7-inch, so they might opt to do that. But like I said, usually we're talking 12 inches at 33 and 7 inches at 45. That's the kind of norm, but there are always exceptions to that rule. So moving on. Now there is a slight difference in quality between the two speeds. 33 has a slightly lower resolution, 45 has a slightly higher resolution. Now, it's not a huge difference, and the trade-off is kind of worth the difference in quality. So if you want to fit an album's worth of music on a 12-inch record, cutting it at 33 is worth the trade-off in quality difference. But if you're cutting a single and you're not worried about the amount of time, then you might as well cut at 45 and get that little bit extra quality. Now the important thing to note is that the quality of the audio actually decreases as you get closer to the middle of the record. So when we're cutting a record, a 12-inch record, let's say, at the outer edge you get the whole circumference per revolution, so you get all that space to cut onto. But as you move in towards the center of the disc, it's still turning at the same rate, but you're getting less area, surface area to cut per revolution. So if you imagine the outer circumference versus the inner circumference here, there's quite a lot of, well, not a lot, but there is a significant size difference. Let's think of an analogy. If you imagine going to the cinema and watching a film, imagine that the screen is actually getting smaller and smaller as the film goes on. So by the end of the film, the screen has actually shrunk a bit, so the definition isn't quite as good. I guess that's the kind of closest analogy I can come up with on the spot. So when you're cutting an album, you've kind of, most of it is great quality. As you're getting to the center, the quality drops off a little bit. And that's why if you're only cutting a 7-inch, which is closer to the middle already, then we cut that quicker because it means you're getting more surface area per revolution to cut the audio onto. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that analogy clears it up. If I think of any better analogies, I'll let you know. I'll do a little edit. So in general, the quality between 33 and 45 isn't huge when we're cutting on the outer bits of a 12-inch, but as we're getting to the middle, it's significant enough that if we're only cutting a 12-inch, it's worth doing it at 45 to get that higher quality. So the final thing we're going to look at is why they added the third to 33 and a third RPM. Why didn't they just keep it at 33? And this is actually quite a tricky one to get to the bottom of it. There's lots of speculation out there. There's lots of things written by people kind of guessing on forums, but there's very few who actually get to the bottom of it. And I think I've found the answer, but if anyone knows differently, let me know in the comments because I'd be really interested to hear. Right, so if you're still watching, let's get into the real nerdy stuff and why they added the third to the 33 and a third and why it's not just a flat 33 RPM. Well, it's because of two things. Firstly is the power cycles that are used to power the record cutting lathes. A really important factor in a record cutting lathe is making sure that the platter or the turntable which the blank record is sitting on is spinning at a consistent and constant rate. Now it's got to be super stable, and so we need to know what frequency the power is that's feeding the machine. In America back in the day, and still today I'm pretty sure, but correct me if I'm wrong, the power cycle was 60 hertz. Whereas over in Europe and the UK, they made the power cycle at 50 hertz. And these two different power cycles actually make motors run at different speeds. So if you plugged a motor into a European outlet and an American outlet, it would actually run at a different speed. So 50 hertz and 60 hertz, I think, is a 20% difference. So the motor would actually run at 20% different speed, which is no good. So the engineers making the record cutting lathes needed to make sure they could measure the speed of a turntable as it was turning. And so they came up with a stroboscope. And basically this works by putting it on your turntable, and as it's speeding up, you see all these little squares. Let's get another close-up of that. So at different speeds and different power cycles, as this is spinning on your turntable, when it hits the correct speed at the correct power cycle, it'll look like the squares are actually staying still. And that's how you know that your turntable is turning or spinning at the correct speed. So this one actually has the different power cycles, 50 and 60 hertz, and then the different speeds, 45 and 33 RPM. So if you put that on, you can actually measure or you can see with your eyes, see with your eyes, I don't know how else you'd see, but you can see if your turntable is spinning at the correct speed, which obviously is really important because we don't want to be cutting a record at the wrong speed, because then when it's played back, it'll be either slowed down and or a little sped up and sound like a chipmunk voice. So getting back to the third at the end of 33 and a third and why it's not just a solid 33 is because of the amount of squares needed on a stroboscope. As you can imagine, these need to be spaced out evenly, and there needs to be a whole number of squares or dots on a stroboscope. It wouldn't work if you had a half a square left over. And unfortunately, at 33 RPM, that's what happens. It wouldn't divide into a whole number of squares. So they changed it to 33 and a third, and then it worked out that you got 180 whole squares playing at a 50 hertz cycle, or if my memory serves me correctly, 216 squares at a 60 hertz cycle. So at either power cycle, you get a whole number of squares on a stroboscope. And of course, that's really important for being able to measure the speed. So there you go. Let's do a quick recap. 33 and a third RPM versus 45 RPM. So they're different speeds. 33 is slower, 45 is faster. They're different qualities. 33 is slightly lower, 45 is slightly better. And the extra little third added onto the end is so that the speed of the cutting turntables can be measured with a stroboscope. So there you go. I hope that's been interesting for you. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them down below. It'd be really interesting to hear if you've got any thoughts on those, or if you've got any other info about the stuff I've talked about. And as always, if you're interested in mastering, analog gear, cutting records, and navigating the music industry as an independent artist, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It really helps, and I've got loads more videos coming. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.